All right, y'all. It is crossover Thursday here. Locked on Eagles and Locked on Saints. It's Gino Camilleri. I'm Ross Jackson. This crossover Thursday edition of Locked on Eagles and Locked on Saints brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks, as well as all of our crossover content here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Go to prizepicks.com, search Locked on NFL, and use code in all lowercase Locked on NFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. All right. So, Gino, what is it that the Philadelphia Eagles need to do to get a win against the New Orleans Saints on Sunday?
The LOE3 keys to victory. Number one, as I said, find a way to make that Saints offense be off key one way or another. Put them behind the sticks. They cannot be in second and short, third and short, because that's when you set up those downfield shots, which sets up their explosive offense, which allows them to put up as many points as they've had the last 2 weeks. Number two, start fast. The Eagles, they have started slower than anyone in the first 2 weeks. Their first two possessions in back-to-back games went interception, fumble, punt, turnover on downs. They have not scored any points on their first two possessions in either of those games. It would be nice to get at least a field goal there. Number three, play 60 minutes. Not 58, not 59, 60 minutes. Because if you can allow the seventh most improbable comeback in the next-gen stats era since 2016 against Kirk Cousins on one leg, what can this New Orleans Saints team do to you?
That's big. That's big. And look, that I love your first two there in particular. They stand out to me because of how much they relate to one another, right? Like the New Orleans Saints in the first two games, as you highlighted, 15 straight possessions with their first team defense on the field, scoring points, right? And that included 6 of 6 to start against Dallas on touchdowns in AT&T Stadium. And so the Saints all of a sudden, and Gino, this has not been the case in New Orleans for the past, I'll say about 3 years. They have not been a fast start offense. They have been a late push offense as of late. And all of a sudden that has changed under offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak. Derek Carr playing at a whole nother level right now. And so, yeah, I think that like that making them play from behind the sticks, giving them those third and longs, which I don't think the Saints saw a third and long last week against Dallas until I believe it was the fourth quarter. And it was like a 3rd and 12. So it was a considerable third and long at that point. But there's that. And then coupled with Philly struggles early on, like there's an opportunity here for New Orleans to continue to open up an early lead, which has really propelled them over the course of the past 2 weeks. So the only team in the NFL, I believe right now, that has not trailed in a game so far through the first couple of weeks. So I think that those are huge. I love those highlights from you.
And you have to start fast, especially if it's going to be a shootout, Ross, because if you can go 6 straight possessions of getting touchdowns, even if half of them are touchdowns, half of them are field goals, you're still talking about 30 points. And that's a good offense in the NFL. And we've talked about at Locked On Eagles, 35 points should be what this Eagles offense aspires to be each and every week. They were a point off of that week 1. Last week got a little slow. But one of the things that in my mind is head scratching with the Saints, the amount of offensive touchdowns in the sport is down dramatically over the last few years.
It's
and New
insane.
Orleans is still putting up an egregious amount of touchdowns. It does not make any sense.
It's such an outlier. And that's one of the reasons why we're all kind of watching and going like, okay, so when does it settle down and what does it settle down to? Because I think everyone's accepted like, okay, 3 straight games of 40 plus points. If you go back to week 18 of the 2023 season, this is abnormal. At some point, it's got to settle down to, but exactly what it settles down to could still be winning football for New Orleans. We just kind of have to see what that's going to be. So I love that. So yours is the LOE3 over there at Locked On Eagles. I'm going to give you 3 of my Jackson 5, which is what mine are over at Locked On Saints. So we both have a lot of fun. So number 1 for me is stopping the run and making plays at the quarterback. If they don't do this, the Saints will probably end up like very close to, if not losing this game. Like this is the spoiler for New Orleans, is if they don't do that. That's why that's number 1 to me. I have a lot of faith in New Orleans. I picked New Orleans for this game, all that kind of stuff. I think that they're like on a roll and it's going to continue here. But that's the big key for me in terms of what can decimate New Orleans' hopes of going 3-0 for this one. Number 2 for me is keeping and playing to their offensive identity, as we were just discussing. There's no need to complicate things here. Just do the things that work. They line up in a lot of 12 personnel. They love their 2 tight ends. They use a lot of 21 as well, which would be 2 running backs, and they dabble, I'll say, in 3 wide receiver sets. But for the most part, what they want to do is run the football, win with their offensive line in the trenches, give help to their offensive line with their very multiple tight ends, multiple in that they can do a lot of different things. I'll say versatile tight ends is probably more appropriate. And then, as you mentioned before, threaten deep with 2 sub 4-4 guys. That's what they want to do as an offense. That's what they'll need to do as an offense. And then finally, I think number 3 for me is stealing a possession or a score. That could be a special teams touchdown. That could be a defense, creating some turnovers, things like that. I think that will allow you to get off to a fast start.
One thing I said on the crossover last week to host Aaron Freeman is that with those 2 veteran safeties they have there in Atlanta, those guys that love to play with their eyes to the quarterback and almost like this poacher hunter type of role, the Eagles got 2 guys this week that you're going to have to worry about as well. The Saints have some good safeties. So if you want some opportunities to make plays on the football, Jalen Hurts has been better in the last week throwing the ball, but he still has some balls where you're like, oh, the defender could make a play on that if your wide receiver didn't play cornerback for a second. But it is not great in Philadelphia right now, but I think it goes back to your first point. You have to make plays on Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts because what they did last week, if you look at that 3rd down drop and you look at the interception to Jalen Hurts in a vacuum, yes, it's rough. But to get them to that point where they almost won that football game after a 17-play, 70-yard, 9.5-minute drive to basically grind that game out, it came on the back of Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts. Even as badly as their coaches coached, sometimes talent is what you need in the NFL. Yeah. I think this one is going to be close. Like you said, I think the average has to come back down to the middle some point for the Saints. But I think that one big explosive touchdown could be the difference. Like Shaheed can cook, man. He might be the best in the league right now doing that.
Gino, I think you and I both preach that because I'm sure I've heard you say this before over Locked On Eagles, but the game in the NFL, particularly against 2 good teams, comes down to 1 or 2 plays.
Oh, it always
makes
does.
a difference, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's exactly what we end up seeing in this matchup for sure. And it's going to be an exciting one, man. I can't wait for this one. It's going to be a blast.
2 teams with good offensive lines. It comes down to the trenches. They can run the ball. Running the football is back in the National Football League, and I really think it comes down to controlling time of possession, who takes care of the ball. And we're talking about 1930s football here in the year 2024. So it's beautiful.